Greetings, you ever-curious Herle Burlyites. Herle here. I'm going to get right to our guest this week because we're taping this thing at 8 a.m. sharp, which, based on who this man is and the good work he does, only tells me one thing. He's got somewhere important to be at 9 or 9:15. Neil Hetherington, CEO of the Daily Bread Food Bank, is on the pod today. Neil has served as their CEO since January 2018. His nonprofit experience includes 16 years as the CEO of Habitat for Humanity in Toronto, and then in New York City, as well as 2 years as CEO of Dixon Hall, which serves thousands in Toronto through social programs, shelters, seniors programs, youth initiatives, and community revitalization efforts. Neil holds degrees and certificates from the University of Western Ontario's Ivey Business School, the Harvard Business School, and the University of Virginia's Darden Business School. So, in light of the current context, Neil got my attention with some statistics he's been putting out in the media recently. The Daily Bread Food Bank is now seeing 4 times more client visits than before the pandemic. So we're going to do a Food Bank 101. What kind of organizations are they? Who runs them? Who uses them? Who's using them now that wasn't using them before? And what causes this problem? And what are some possible solutions? Neil, it's a real pleasure to welcome you to the Herle Burly today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, David. I'm doing well. But what is happening in the food bank environment is horrific.
Yeah, but you are personally okay?
I'm doing all right.
Good to know. Excellent. Good to know. Hey, listen, I got to start. I want to talk to you about food security, obviously, but I got to start by asking you, what was Jimmy Carter like?
I have a deep love and respect for President Carter. If you think about it, he's a nuclear engineer. He is a brilliant man who has been a force for good, both in his presidency and following. And what he has done through Habitat for Humanity and as important or more important, the Carter Center in terms of waging peace and doing his best to eradicate some very unknown diseases like guinea worm and river blindness has resulted in him getting the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. And I wish that all political leaders had the values and the smarts of President Carter, and I wish him and Rosalind well as they go through this very difficult time.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no photo op for him, eh? I mean, he really dug into these issues, and in a really granular way. Like, this is no Clinton Foundation flying on private jets to conferences. Yeah. This is building houses and going to Africa, right?
Yeah, I mean, he did a number of projects with since I think it was 1984 was the first one, I mean, he picked up a hammer when he unexpectedly was forced to retire from his career in 1980. The White House staff bought him a carpentry shop. And so in Plains, Georgia, he has a woodworking shop where he makes different things. He's a great carpenter. He made the collection plates for the church that he goes to in Plains, Georgia, Maranatha Baptist. He's a wonderful human being, and the world will be at a loss for the elder statesman leaving us.
Right. Okay, so let's get to our topic for today, Neil, which is, I read a story a couple of weeks ago about something you'd said to the media about usage of the food bank and how much money it was costing to provide food for the new surge and people that needed it, and they were shocking. They were shocking numbers. Can you take us through precisely what's going on at the food bank right now?
Yeah, so the Daily Bread Food Bank operates about 200 food programs in the city of Toronto. We, alongside North York Harvest, ensure that food banks have the amount of food that they need for an ever-increasing client volume. So let's sort of go back to pre-pandemic. We were seeing about 60 to 65,000 client visits per month. Pandemic hits, and that number essentially doubles to 120,000. And that was at the time we were all clanging pots and we were saying, we got to build back better. And we didn't, David. We didn't build back better at all. And I think the federal budget and provincial budget that just came out are testament to that. And so what happened when you get this acute shock of inflation, we went from 120,000, which was abysmal, to 270,000 this past March. 270,000 client visits in a single month. You could, I mean, the Jays home opener was just recently played, and you could fill up the Rogers Center 6 times with the number of people that we are feeding every single month. It is ridiculous, and it is
so 4.5 times what it was pre-pandemic.
That's right. Yeah. And so you mentioned costs, like what's it costing the food bank to be able to deal with this? It has escalated from $1.5 million a year to $1.8 million a month to be able to keep up with the need. So you might say, wait a sec, shouldn't it just be 4.5 times more money? Like whatever you did before, it's 4. You get exponential growth when it comes to client visits versus costs. If you think we get a bunch of food that's donated and it sort of covers off your first 1 million visits in a year, every visit after that, we're paying full freight. And it's costing us some 12.
Sorry, I don't understand. Can you go back and explain that funding formula to me?
Yeah. So we don't get government funding. I think there's a misconception that food banks get government funding.
Where do you get your money then?
It's all from people like you. It's generosity of individuals who are listening to this. It is purely philanthropic funding.
Really? No government money?
None. Now, we did get in 2020 during the pandemic, there was a one-off federal donation to Food Banks Canada, and the provincial government provided us 2 weeks worth of food in 2020. But those were 2 one-off incidents. But other than that, no, we raised money from the community for the community.
Right. So you've had to ramp up your fundraising enormously in order to keep up with this. What happens if you don't?
What happens if we don't is horrific. The amount of food that somebody gets starts to decline. It means that we go from 3 days worth. We provide 3 days worth of food for every family member once a week. So we're supplementing what they need. So 3 days out of 7. And if we would go down to 2.9, 2.8, 2.7 days worth of food, each time we make one of those point differences, it's about $1.2 million that we'll save by doing that. So we don't want to get to that situation. So what did we do? We did a press conference last week, and we tried our best to tell the world, listen, we're not here to raise money or raise food. We're not here to seek platitudes and gratitude from the community for the work that we're doing. What we are here to do is articulate very clearly to the community that we have a systemic issue, and we made a call out to the provincial government to help us in this dire situation.
Okay. So just talk a little bit more about the structure of the food bank itself. So this is a volunteer organization, like who runs this? Who is it?
Who is it? So we have an awesome board of directors. We have a board of directors of 15 women and men from all walks of life in the community that bring about different skill sets, and they govern the organization and are held accountable to our membership. And our membership are each of the food banks. So I don't know. I was driving by the Church of the Transfiguration yesterday, and there was a long line up there at Avenue Road in DuPont. That's one member, and so you have about 200 food programs. They all get one vote, and we are held accountable to them. They're our shareholders.
Okay.
And so we are for the community of the community. And then we have a small staff. We have truck drivers. We have people who organize the food. The logistics are extraordinary. We're sending out 160,000 pounds of food a day now. It used to be 30,000 pounds. It's 160,000 pounds of food a day. And for us to do that means we need to be real good at supply chain and logistics.
And is this food given to you at some sort of cut rate like you buy it at grocery stores?
No,
Where
we don't
does it
buy it
come
at grocery store. There's a few channels of food. So one would be coming from people listening to this podcast, people who would drop off a donation at a fire hall or a grocery store, and we need that, and we're grateful for it. A big part of where we get our food is direct from farms. There's a provincial tax credit that makes it advisable. It makes it good for farmers to give excess product to food banks. They get a tax credit, so it pays them to do good. And so we have trucks going constantly to southwestern Ontario primarily to pick up fruits and vegetables. That's a huge portion. About 60% of what we're sending out now is fresh food and fresh and frozen food. Only 40% now is what you think of the food bank, the cans and the boxes. And so we get farms as a big component, the community, and then we purchase food. We have an individual who every week has to figure out what do we have in the warehouse, what's needed in the community, and buy the difference and get it out there.
Right. But you're not in any way partnering with the grocery sector. They're not contributing to your efforts.
Well, we do pick up food from different grocery stores, and that is helpful from a reclamation perspective. But from a scale perspective, it doesn't even touch the radar when it comes to what is needed. So we have an open invitation for any of the grocery retailers to divest of any of their wealth to the food bank. We would be a partner in that challenge that they have.
Right. Okay. So prior to the pandemic, when you were getting about 60,000 people a month, who were they? What kind of people find themselves needing your services in a normal situation? Like what straits are they and what's happened to them that they need this help?
So a large portion are individuals who are on disability. So about 60% have their primary source of income as from disability or OW.
Well, wait a second. Can I just stop you? How much of this could we solve then by just giving a reasonable disability benefit to people?
And that's exactly what we asked for on Wednesday. What we said was, so if you're on disability, here's the quick math. You get $1,200 a month. The poverty line is $2,200 in Toronto. Right. Every month, somebody on disability is legislated to be in poverty by $900, and that is fundamentally wrong. So, and you just do the math. An average studio apartment rents for about $1,250 a month. Food for the average person is about $350 a month. That number is probably a little out of date. And transit pass, right? $130, $140. And there's a discounted one. So you add it up there, right? Just at your very basics, like that excludes clothing, that excludes anything to do with
Disney Plus.
Disney Plus or a cell phone. And I'm not saying Disney Plus is a necessity, but a cell phone is becoming a necessity. And so it excludes all of that, and you're already underwater by $400. And so what we said to the province on Wednesday was, hey, if you really want to solve this and have you got to address disability payments. They've got to be somewhat reasonable. And we got at least we got a response. I was pleased that we got a response, but the response wasn't what I wanted, which was no. And so we're going to keep on fighting on this front. Okay. So you asked me a question, like who's coming? So a lot of people on social assistance, but here's what's changing. Last year, about 18 months ago, 15% of food bank users had full-time employment. In the course of 18 months, that has increased to 35% have full-time jobs. So, and we know that of food bank users, about 50% have a post-secondary education. So that whole mantra that, you go to school, you find a job, you work hard, you'll be fine. That truth is truthiness now. It's not always the case.
So why would a person who has a full-time job need a food bank?
Simply the cost of living in the city. So I was with walking through one of the food bank lines a few months ago, and there was a producer there, a producer from one of Canada's largest media networks, and that's an individual. In her case, she has 3 children. She makes a decent salary. She was making about $50,000-$60,000, and she had to go online. If you think about a couple $1,000s for rent, and what that means to the paycheck, there's not a lot. Particularly when you add in the fact that food inflation on its own has increased your bill by about $50 to $60 per month, and so add 3 mouths to hers, there's an extra $240 that she otherwise didn't budget for. She needs to make ends meet. She does what she needed to do for her family, and she visited the Daily Bread Food Bank.
Okay. Again, back to a pre-pandemic in a normal circumstance. Are people long-term reliant on you, or do they hit speed bumps and need your help? Would any of our listeners care to know where you end up when you exit west out of Regina along the Trans-Canada Highway and then bear northwest on 32? Well, it's Prelate, Saskatchewan, rural municipality of Happyland, area code 306, homestead of the Herle clan. In fact, my dad was the reeve of Happyland. Except that, when I was 6 years old, my parents packed us all up and moved to Regina. They wanted to give the Herle children all the opportunities only a big city could provide. Flash forward 55 years or so, our presenting sponsor TELUS has the strongest track record of bringing connectivity and the opportunities that come with it to Canada's rural and Indigenous communities. They are the leading advocates for our smaller places having access to the digital tools they need to thrive. So what does that mean in practical terms? They work with each community partner to understand the objectives and then invest in infrastructure and technology to best meet their needs. From spurring economic growth to education and access to healthcare, TELUS is deeply committed to creating the digital pathways necessary to serve each community. When TELUS makes a promise, they keep it. I want to give you a sense of what TELUS has accomplished here through those promises. To date, they've co-invested over $475 million with government partners to help close the digital divide for our rural and Indigenous communities. 504 rural communities and 577 Indigenous lands are now enabled with TELUS advanced broadband connectivity, impacting over 360,000 households and local businesses. And over 23,000 kilometers of remote highways are now safer because of mobile coverage that helps drivers tap into emergency services. Herle Burlyites, TELUS has an enviable track record of bringing the best connectivity experience they can to Canada's rural, remote, and Indigenous communities, on time and on budget. To learn more about it, visit telus.com/rural. Or are there people that year in, year out, week in, week out are there?
Yeah. So the answer is it depends. And we can make some correlations between their background and what their frequency of use will be. So somebody on disability, we will see you until death do us part. Once they arrive, they are forced by legislation to have to rely on friends, family, and charity to be able to survive. So that is obviously problematic. Right. Newcomers to Canada come in, they make use of the food bank for a few months, and then they're gone, and we don't see them again. They are the quickest to come in. Then you have episodic individuals. Maybe they lost their job, and they had some debts they had to pay, things like that. There's an episode and there's a crisis in their life, and we'll be there for them, and they will come in and be there for maybe a few months and then have to leave.
Okay. So that woman who made 50 to 60 grand, who's got a couple of kids, when she shows up at the food bank, what does she get?
Well, she gets, I would hope she gets a lot of respect and dignity for having to cross that threshold into the food bank. And
people are probably embarrassed, right?
Yeah. And so we do our best to make sure that they're not. We do our best to be able to make sure it's dignified, low barrier service. And so what she gets is a shopping experience. So in her case, she would walk into
So you don't wait in line and get handed a basket or a bag of things. You actually have some discretion and choice in this?
Yeah, there's some that still do the hamper. We call that the hamper model. Yeah. But that has mostly gone away. A number of years ago, we started to bring in essentially a shopping model. So you'd come in, you'd say a family of four, you're registered. We have a certain database that we register people in, and so you're given a certain number of points, and let's call it 400 points for four folks, and then she shops using points instead of dollars, and selects the food that's most appropriate for her. Maybe it's culturally appropriate food, health concerns that might be there, ethnic food that is appropriate for her. That she chooses what she wants to buy.
Right. What kind of meat would you get?
Generally, it's chicken, and pretty well all of the meat that we serve is halal meat. So we know that about 7 to 8% of food bank clients are Muslim, and therefore we say, well, does it really make sense for us to try to create two different SKUs of halal meat or not? And so we just provide halal meat across the board. So chicken would be the primary. Chicken and fish would be the two primary meats. From time to time, there's ground beef. From time to time, there's other types of beef and pork, but I would say primarily it's chicken.
Right. And you give 3 meals a week, 3 days worth of meals a week. How many people do you think are missing some meals still?
Oh yeah, it's well, we know that, and what we have seen during the pandemic is the depth of food insecurity has also increased. So we know that there are probably an underreporting of children who have missed a meal. You think about that when we ask that question. Have your kids ever had to go without a meal? How likely is it that somebody's going to say, yeah, they've had to go without a meal? Fearing CAS, the concerns.
Yeah.
So it's probably an underreporting that.
Come and take my kid away from me.
And it's there's an embarrassment associated with that. So we know that there's probably an underreporting, and what we do know is that there's about 15 to 20% of the children that come to food banks go at least once a week without a meal. And then that number obviously escalates dramatically for the parents, more than double, so about a third. And so we are just a supplement. We are just 3 of 7 days. And in the environment that we're in, we know that the average food bank user has $8.01 per day to survive on after paying their rent and utilities. And so you can't you just can't get by. That's barely enough money for transit to get to and from a food bank. And that's all that they've got. They have to rely on food charity, friends, and family to make up the difference. And that number actually is dramatically lowered if you ask the question, are you a new Canadian? That number goes down to $3.47 if they're a new Canadian.
Right. Okay, so before the pandemic, your clients were a lot of people on disability, people on social assistance, new Canadians looking to get a foothold. Now that you've got 4 times as many people coming, and I mean, you and I know each other, and you know that I did some research work for the Maple Leaf Center for Action on Food Insecurity and some public opinion research work, and we found that the number of Canadians who felt stressed or worried that they would not be able to feed their families doubled over the course of the pandemic, from 12% of the population to a full quarter of the population, 24%. So who's different now post-pandemic, this surge? Are these people with like the woman you cited with jobs and houses and thought they had regular lives and now all of a sudden need a food bank?
Yeah, I think we got to go back and just emphasize what you said. Essentially, 1 in 4 Canadians are stressed about food. And then StatsCan did a supplemental, and they asked the question: do you think you're going to have to make use of food charity this year? And 1 in 5 Canadians said, I think I might have to go to a food bank.
Right.
And you just think about that. 1 in 5
Staggering.
Canadians, and why is this not on the Globe and Mail's front page every single day that we are in this challenge? And is it because of the shame around poverty? Is it? I don't understand why it is not the national crisis declared the national crisis that it is. So people are more stressed about it. And I think you can see that actually just in terms of mental health and challenges that people have when you're walking on the street or taking the subway. People are stressed and concerned. The biggest change for us really has been the explosive growth of people who have full-time employment. And so it's often with people who have cobbled together a couple of jobs. So yeah, I've got 35 hours, but I don't have benefits. So I'm too rich to be able to get any prescription medications, but I'm too poor to be able to afford them. And so you're caught between: do I get the drugs that I need for myself or my children? Or do I pay the hydro? Do I pay the rent, or am I going to pay a medical bill? And so those are some of the challenges that we're seeing in the growth of and here's the topper on it: things are good. Things are good right now. We have unemployment at 4%. This is the first time it's been upside down world. We always used to be a direct correlation between unemployment and food bank use, and now it's inverse. It's opposite world. And so what's giving me gray hair and concern is when unemployment starts to rise, and we know it will. Everything's cyclical. And how will we deal with that? And some of our modeling is absolutely atrocious at the Daily Bread Food Bank of how many people we could be serving.
So let's just dig into that for a second. Is the problem for employed people that food is too expensive, or their job pays too poorly?
Well, I think it's a both. I think it's a both and situation. Canada internationally does not do well when it comes to food pricing. And there's a variety of reasons for that. We have market boards that escalate pricing significantly. We rank out of 120 countries 27th in terms of affordability, behind Japan and Australia, Qatar. We do not do well on affordability at all when it comes to food pricing. I don't want to go down the route of let's blame the grocery stores. They're just one of several elements to a combined price that is unaffordable for folks. But we do also rank very well when it comes to food safety. And I don't know, are we doing it? Is there some sort of trade-off that we've made there? But we rank number 1 in the world on food safety, so we can celebrate that, I guess.
But I mean, it is curious because the unemployment rate is so low, and frankly, minimum wages are at a more reasonable level now than they used to be. I mean, maybe the reason this isn't on the front page of the Globe and Mail is because if you've got a situation where people who are full-time employed can't buy enough food for themselves, then you don't have a poverty problem. You've got a more fundamental problem in your society, right?
You do. And so, and I think everyone in business should be very concerned about that. Am I going to be able to have a workforce that can afford to live in a reasonable proximity of that place of employment in a globally competitive environment? You think about minimum wage being just shy of $16. How will we maneuver within the global context, because it's clearly not enough to live in here, but then you start knocking on the forces that will drive some of those jobs to other countries.
Right. So just a few sort of things that seem related to me. So food inflation. So you're saying that what's happened in this period of the last, year and a half where we've had inflation has literally tipped the balance of affordability for hundreds of thousands of people. So they were on that kind of knife's edge.
Yep.
Financially.
And you saw that vividly when the pandemic started. You remember it was the lockdown happened, I think it was March 25th, and the lineups at food banks were there the week following, right around the block. And that was an outward sign of a lack of resiliency that individuals had. And I was surprised at how quickly the lineups appeared, and how the lessons of being able to save 3 months of income for a rainy day. People don't have that luxury, right. And we saw that clearly.
You mentioned New Canadians being often an early and temporary client. Do you call them clients, customers? What do you call them?
We call them clients. I like customer better, but we call them clients.
Okay. So, immigration numbers are going up rapidly in the country and have been for the last couple of years and are projected to continue to. I know it's a big and complicated question, immigration, but is it exacerbating this problem?
It is complicated because I don't think there's a binary answer to that. I think you dive into a lot of social policy where we do need immigration. We do need that workforce to come into the country to be globally competitive. At the same time, I think we have to ask the question, are we building the infrastructure appropriate for that? So we're certainly not building proportionally affordable housing. There was almost nothing in the federal budget to support the national housing strategy in a significant way. So we are not, from bricks and mortar perspective, I don't think we're prepared on that front. And I do think that there's legitimacy to concerns from the province and cities who say it's great that you can say, let's bring in X number of people, but who's paying for the social services? And that gets downloaded to the province and to the city. And you can see that in the shelter system. You can see that in food bank usage. On a positive note, we do see that those are individuals who move through that system more rapidly. There is a desire there's a demonstrated speed at which somebody is no longer making use of those social services. So it's complex. It really is. And I don't think that it's an either or.
Right. Okay. So, Neil, a person listening to this could say, you know what, this is very sad that there's so many people that need help. And thank God Neil and all of his compatriots are there across the country to manage this problem for them and for society. So I don't need to worry about it because the infrastructure in the food banks is already in place to deal with this problem. What would you say to that?
I'd say that's misguided. We are not a parallel social structure. We are there for a need now. But we have a dual mission. And the first part of our mission is feed the need now. Do whatever we can to make sure that nobody goes hungry. But the other part of our mission, which we take exceedingly seriously, is around the advocacy side of things. We are providing a small amount of what is actually needed to support somebody through that difficult time, and so. But we do have the on the ground touch points with clients, with your neighbors, with our neighbors, so that we can tell those stories, we can relay those statistics, and help government walk back from the limb that they collectively are on right now. And so we provide that through research, through polling. We provide that through recommendations of social policy. And as a bonus, we also give them, if you do this policy, here is the impact that it will have. And so now we need to make sure that we give them the courage and the moral authority and pressure on leadership to be able to enact policies that are in line with the values that we're espousing.
Well, we're there. I know it's been a long, cold slog, and lots of you are still looking out the front window at snow, and there was a huge, nasty ice storm last week. But really, winter is done. The corner is turned. Laissez le bon temps rouler. Try to pronounce that the way they do in New Orleans, or in Prelate. See what I just did there? Magical thinking. We all start chirping optimistically in early March, as though saying winter is over will make it happen. I hope it is, but I have no idea. It just makes me feel good to say so. Our sponsor, CN, cannot afford that sort of self-indulgence. It runs a railroad through the reality of Canada's climate. Snow, ice, and deep cold is the enemy of air brakes and steel wheels on steel tracks. And this past winter was typically harsh. The figures are a matter of public record. Across northern Ontario and the prairies, there were about 4 weeks of 25 below zero cold this past winter. 25 below is the tipping point. When it gets that cold, government regulations stipulate the trains must be shortened. The railway has to change gaskets and hoses and constantly monitor wheels and track for cracks. Hauling cargo becomes a much bigger job. But here's the point. CN did all that and still managed to set 12 weekly records for moving grain. Last October was its best single month ever. Period. Paragraph. The following 5 months were right up there too. CN railroaders broke the record for the most grain shipped in a single week, and then a few weeks later broke the new record. To be clear, CN did not break those records because it was a mild winter. It broke them in spite of a mean winter. I've noted here before that CN can't unscramble overseas supply chains, but it can and does ensure smooth, safe, rock-solid dependability here at home. And really, folks, I do think winter's over. I mean, it just has to be. Okay, but let's get serious. I mean, there were just two budgets. There's a provincial budget in Ontario, and there was a federal budget not long ago. And other than the GST rebate, those budgets were pretty silent on this question. So when you're doing your advocacy, what do they say to you? What do they say to you about disabled people that can't feed themselves?
I meet with a lot of elected officials. Let me tell you the meeting. I can tell you what's going to happen in the half-hour meeting in about 20 seconds. I come in, we smile, and I tell them, here's what's happening across the city. Here's what's happening in your riding, and it's horrific, bad stats. And then they say, what can be done? I give them a list of things that can be done, and then they pat me on the back and they say, you're doing a good job. Thanks so much. And that is my meeting in 20 seconds. So you're right, David. We have an incredible advocacy team. They're doing everything right. From our business plan and our strategy, they're doing everything right. But you know what? I guess we're failing because we are not moving the mark at all when it comes to any of the social policies that we're advocating for. And I think we need to own that. And so last Wednesday was our first step up. We said, listen, we can't go on this way. And we lined up. There were about 40 agencies behind me at the podium as we spoke to what is going on. And it was our first sort of shot over the bow to say, hey, something has to be done. And we laid out one recommendation, one clear recommendation: change disability now. So there's the next sort of stage.
Seems to be pretty moral high ground to be on.
Well, yes, it is.
Right.
And it makes so much sense. Poverty in Ontario costs $33 billion a year. It makes economic sense to deal with poverty at its root.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah,
that seems bullshit to me. Come on.
It's absolutely not. But Feed Ontario does a study every single year, a peer-reviewed study that says, okay, what does poverty cost? And so you add up things like healthcare. So people who are having to spend a night in the ER, and you look at healthcare, the criminal justice system, shelter system, and you start to add up each of these different areas, and you realize very quickly that poverty is incredibly expensive. I used to, through Dixon Hall, operate a number of shelters in the Toronto area. Right. And we were provided about 100, and at that time, so it was about 8 years ago, it was about $125 a night for somebody to get we called it 3 hots and a cot, 3 hot meals and a cot for the night. And that was, but now think about that. So you got $125 per night. Put that over a month, right? You're at like $4,000. It makes a lot more sense to build affordable housing than to spend that on the shelter system. It's a lot cheaper, and so there's an economic benefit. So no, what I was saying on 33 billion is not BS. In fact, it's the exact opposite, and it's painful to realize. But your BS comment took me off track. Where were we talking about before that?
Well, we were talking about why governments don't respond to you.
Oh, yeah. So here's where I want to go on that front. So we put out this press conference. We got a tremendous amount of media attention, and that's okay for now. But then, this week, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to raise our voices a little bit more. And we're talking about all of these different stages that we should think about from an advocacy perspective. And one of the ideas that I brought to the staff that I don't know if we might be a little nervous in doing it, I said, why don't we just shut down the 200 food banks during the summer? We'll shut them all down, except for one location. And that location will be the lawn of Queen's Park. And you can get your food. There's some 10,000, 15,000 people. You can get your food every single day. We're sorry for the inconvenience because you got to go to a museum or station or Queen's Park to get your food. But every single day, that's where the food bank will distribute its food in that public park. And let's do that until disability is changed. And, we're not a radical organization. We're not a pitchforks and placards kind of organization. But at some point, I think we actually need to be, because people's right to food isn't being realized. The systems aren't in place to do it. We know what they are, but we're making a concentrated choice not to enact those systems. So until they're there, maybe we should get a little rowdy.
Absolutely. But listen, you've confused me a little bit today, and you just sort of confused me yet again, and in this way, in that sometimes you slip into talking about poverty. And I would always have thought that poverty and hunger would be synonymous with each other. But what you've also told us today is that is not the case, is that people who we would not consider to be impoverished, people who have a job and have a home and etc., are needing the assistance of food banks. So now it makes it a more complicated problem for me, because now you're not just needing to get money to poor people, but you actually have a problem with your working class.
Well, if the working class can't afford to survive, are they not experiencing poverty? I think that might be, and I don't mean to be semantic.
No, that's a fair point
about it.
Yeah.
And so, hunger, which is what we deal with, hunger is just a symptom of poverty. And so we consistently talk about how do you eradicate poverty? And you do that through 3 things in our mind, which is decent, affordable housing, income supports that are appropriate, and decent work. Those 3 things, you get those 3 things done, and you start to see that $33 billion decrease.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about housing. What is the relation? First of all, I mean, when I think of housing these days in Toronto, particularly, I think about 2 things. I think about the middle class affordability of housing, and then I think about the homeless issue, which, we seem to be headed down the road that we've seen in American cities of a really growing homeless population. Nobody's very comfortable with that. But what is the relationship between housing and food insecurity?
Well, it would speak mostly to affordability. I think that when I think about housing, I often think about it from a spectrum perspective. And there's, so you talk about, a shelter bed, transitional housing, highly supportive housing, rent geared to income, rental, market rental, and affordable home ownership, and then home ownership. And and we seem to be spending a lot of time talking about shelters in the city of Toronto because we see this outward challenge of people living in parks, encampments, and we say, well, we got to just build up shelters and force folks to go there. And it is true that we need additional shelter beds, but it's more true that we need to get supportive housing and rent geared to income housing built. We haven't been in that marketplace, and it just costs money. And I hate to say it, it really boils down to an appropriation of a budget being putting resources into bricks and mortar.
And you're talking about affordable housing now. You're not talking about the middle class. You're talking about social housing, basically. You're not talking about the middle class affordability challenge. You're talking about
yeah. Yeah, and to me, I think that you make sure that where are there government interventions, and the deep interventions need to be on that one side of the spectrum. That's the deep interventions, because no market forces are going to be able to take care of it. On the market rental and home ownership side of things, you want to make sure that developers have incentives and that it is a thriving sector of the economy, and so you set up the parameters for them to thrive there. But as you go down, there's more interventions. Some of them might be regulatory, and some of them might be actually cash going out.
Right. Okay. So, other than the disability benefit, which seems obvious, what are you advocating government to do? Like, I know that you people would like to be put out of business.
Absolutely.
So, what puts you out of business?
I think if you brought it down to one thing, which I would love to, I think that the climate when CERB came out was there for it. It would be a guaranteed basic income. I would think that if you could introduce a model that taxes it back for those that don't need it, you would. My job would be precarious, and I would love that.
Okay. And tell me just a little bit, because I asked the Associate Minister of Finance about it on the show last week. School food program. I asked him where that was, because it was in the government's platform in the election. It was in mandate letters, and it didn't appear. And he said, well, there's only so much we can do in any given year. It might still happen next year. Are you a fan of that idea?
I am a fan of it. I do think that it makes sense. And here's where it makes sense. I think it makes sense from a ease of access to social programs. So if you think that everybody has that guaranteed income, you can start to divest of a very complex web of social policies. It is really hard to navigate. If you think about your healthcare, David, and how hard it is to navigate that on its own, the social framework is actually much more complex. So it eases that, and I think that at a minimum, if I was in cabinet, I would be articulating that we need to finish up studies on it and determine, so we make an evidence-based decision. I was really disappointed when provincially we stopped midstream a study that was in play. Yeah. Probably I'm only guessing, because I don't think that they'd want to see the results of it. And the result, because it does work, and it works again. Mental health has been such a on the at the forefront of the news often. If you think about the security with a basic income, and how that might affect decisions that you're making, when you have security and comfort knowing next month I will receive let's call it $2,000, and I'll be able to pay for my rent. And the ease that comes with that, and that is a positive thing. And I believe our country is spending more money than it needs to on other programs, and this is the type of program that will, from an economics perspective, have a far better payoff.
Yeah, I'm a big fan too. But one of the reasons I keep coming back to school food is guaranteed income will not help that person you talk to, that woman who's making 60 grand and has a couple of kids. And almost the only thing that's really on the table that might help her is the relief of that her kid getting 5 meals a week might provide her with.
That definitely would be a positive thing, but it could help her. And, so you'd have to go to what are the regulations and when are you going to tax it back? And so that person making $50,000, $60,000, yes, they might not receive the full 2,000. They might be taxed back half of it in that case. So you can scale it. And that's one of the beauties of that program. The other program that is coming down, it's Bill C-22. It's in the Senate right now. It was passed by Parliament unanimously, which was wonderful, and that is a federal disability payment. And my hope is that federal disability payment might equate to the difference between what disability is right now in the province, $1,200, and what the poverty line is. Maybe I'm being too optimistic, but we're certainly pressing the Senate and pressing the House of Commons on the regulatory framework for that to make sure that it is a top up that will result in real positive things for those on disability.
Cool. Okay, so I'm going to let you go in a second, but I do want to ask you a question about yourself.
Sure.
So as people can tell from your introduction, from your bio, you were once very interested in business, and you studied business and you were in business. And then you left to work in the charitable sector, starting with Habitat and then ending up where you are now. Two questions in one. First of all, why did you make that change? What motivated you to make that change? And because of where I come from, I'm always interested in why did you decide to go right to the ground and deal with these issues on a very granular level instead of going into politics and trying to make a systemic change?
So that's my dog, Charlie.
Hey, Charlie.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah.
On the why did I make the change? Mission matters most to me. I need to be motivated by that rather than a mission talking about we're going to be the number one hard candy manufacturer in the sector. That just doesn't do anything.
The most sustainable hard candy manufacturer.
Absolutely. Yeah. Those things, those kinds of business mission statements, they just really turn me off. My grandfather was the international leader of the Salvation Army, and he was an incredible man. And out of London, he navigated that organization in the late 70s. And he had an incredible impact on me, a man who put his faith into action. And so I think that there was some influence. And then the other part is the charitable sector needs to be the most businessy of any sector. It's the most competitive sector in our economy. There are 86,000 charities in Canada. So we need folks who are running charities to be business savvy. And here's the thing. When I did my MBA at Ivy, they would always throw me as the nonprofit guy, the softball questions. Like they'd be like, there'd be some softball HR question. Let's ask the guy from the social sector. And what they didn't get was in the most competitive sector of the economy is the charitable sector. Second, you have to do more with less, with more transparency and an overarching governance structure that you don't have. You have massive freedom when you're an entrepreneur running your company. We don't have that, and we still are expected for better results. Think about it. We have to raise $1 for every 15 cents we spend on $1. How many companies are raising $1 for every 15 cents and have that kind of ROI? Very, very few. So you have to do that. And so the mission, the people, and then you asked on a granular level, there is something about swinging a hammer with Habitat for Humanity. There is something about the logistics around getting food in and out and providing that on a shelf to somebody that is hard work and motivating work. And as long as I'm useful to the sector, I would like to be part of it. You asked about politics, to change it from a systemic perspective. Daily Bread has had a history where its executive directors, its CEOs have always gone into politics or come from politics, and I will break that trend. I will never put my name on a ballot, because there is this love for community that I think I can make a more substantive difference on the ground.
Cool. Thank you very much. Listen, anybody who's listening or watching this, how can they help right now?
Of course, you can donate food or funds. But here's the thing. We've got dailybread.ca/take action. If you go to that website, you can just press a quick button and we'll send a letter off. But anybody can send a letter to any elected official. All levels of government have a poverty reduction strategy. Just write, "Dear elected person, please implement your poverty reduction strategy. Lots of love, Frank." And that's all you need to do. It'll take you 2 minutes. Just send any elected official that. It would make a great deal of difference to us.
Excellent. Neil, thanks so much for sparing the time for us. And I'm sorry to have taken you away from your work, frankly, which sounds very stressful and busy and hugely important right now. So thanks for explaining this problem to everybody. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN, and as well everybody who watched or listened to the program today. And of course, one more time, I'd like to thank Neil Hetherington of the Daily Bread Food Bank in Toronto for being with us today. It's a great conversation.
Thanks very much, David.
Take care.